Today,
Hi, Katrina.
Hello. Today we have Katia Leonaite, and she's one of our wonderful empowered mothers from the new book, A Modern Woman's Guide to a Natural Empowering Birth. And today we're going to meet her and find out a little bit more about her experience and why did she have such a positive experience that led to her being in the book in the first place.
Secret motherhood business.
That's right. Can you tell us a little bit about your birth experience, just in a brief, a few words, or tell us a little bit?
Look, for me, it was quite interesting because I think I had a pretty clear picture of what I wanted going in. I was fairly set on having a natural birth, so I did a lot of research and a lot of preparation to make sure that, not so much that I was in control of the experience, but that I could stack the odds in my favor, so to speak. So that as a result of it, I felt that I was educated and empowered about what was going on. I knew what I was expecting and where things could go in a number of different directions so that I could make decisions about which way I wanted to steer the situation.
Okay.
And to me, I guess the whole experience of birth, it was certainly very positive. And in fact, I remember thinking afterwards for the next few days while you're high on mummy drugs, on the oxytocin, that I remember feeling so proud about, it was such an achievement to have set out to have a natural birth and have gone through with it, and everything had gone to plan and well. So yeah,
that's
it was
fantastic.
a good experience.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about your preparations?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I guess before I got pregnant, I sort of had, that mental picture that the media manufactures of what a birth looks like. If you pretty much pick up any Hollywood movie, you have, legs up in the air, screaming foul and all of that kind of stuff. And I knew that that wasn't what I wanted my experience to be. So I started looking around and I came across a school of thought called Hypnobirthing, which is kind of similar to calm birth, and there's a couple of other methods that have a lot of, resonating themes between them. So we came across Hypnobirthing specifically, so I read a book and that really resonated with what I wanted to achieve and how I wanted the process to unfold. So then I just found out a practitioner in our area who was training in hypnobirthing, and that was a really powerful experience because it allowed me and my husband to go along and sort of create this shared understanding, almost creating social capital, if you like, about what we wanted to happen as part of the birthing process. And it also allowed us to really create new anchors for what we, the mental picture that we had of the birth. So we watched videos of, positive birthing experiences and, an orgasmic birth and a water birth and a this birth and that birth. So by the time we walked away, that picture was a lot stronger than the Hollywood picture that sells movies.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any birth lessons that you learned along the way?
I think for me there were two lessons, of which one was kind of reinforcing my own belief and preparation. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is, that we had doula come along with us, and I knew myself well enough to know that I would be concerned about, is my husband coping and does he know what he's supposed to do, and is he advocating on my behalf in the way that I am happy with, because he's not of medical background and training. And I wanted to make sure that that wasn't a concern that would be in my head. I could just relax and get into my birthing body and get on with doing what I was there to do. So as a result of it, I found a lady who was a doula, and she just happened to have been trained as a midwife originally. So she understood the system within which we were operating, but she also understood my needs really clearly, and she was trained in hypnobirthing. So she answered, she ticked all the boxes for us. So that was perfect. So that was one of the lessons, because from there I could relax. At one point, apparently my husband went out and had dinner for about half an hour across the road at a cafe. I had no knowledge of it because at every point in time that, my doula or him or both were with me, I felt comfortable, secure, attended and so forth. So that was great. And I think the other experience though is about flexibility. The other lesson was about flexibility, because in as much as I say that everything went perfectly, which it did, there were some deviations from my initial theoretical plan. And I think sometimes when deviations happen in your head, it gives you an opportunity to question, does that mean I haven't achieved the perfect birth, so to speak? Does that mean I have failed? You know, and it sort of creates the opening for that questioning. And I think learning to reconcile the fact that, okay, you know, in my ideal world, I wanted to have 0 interventions. I happen to have had an episiotomy. But you know what? Everything else is fine. I still got through with, you know, there was no drugs involved. My baby was healthy and happy, you know, da-da-da-da-da. And, you know, I can tick off a list of 100 things that I was perfectly happy with. And if there's one that I'm maybe 50% happy with or 20% happy with, well, you know what? It's a pretty good outcome.
And if you were to do it again, would you do anything differently?
You know, yes, actually there is one thing that I would do very differently. One thing that I really wanted to do is I wanted to give birth not lying down. And I was, my labour was pretty much entirely in the shower on all fours with water running down my back, and that was perfect. That worked really well for me. I, you know, chatted my way through labour. But at one point they brought me up on the bed to do the next round of monitoring, and then apparently I was offered to get back off the bed, but the state that I was in, that did not register, and I stayed there. And I wonder to this day whether the episiotomy that I had was a result of me having stayed on the bed and lying down, and whether had I been able to get up and let gravity work with me, whether I would have been able to get away without it. So I think the one thing that I would do differently is I would actually, and having spoken to other women, I've heard that apparently it is quite a common thing to have happen. So I would say to my husband or my doula, make sure you get me up off the bed. Even if I'm not saying, no, I'll stay here, move me. That's probably the only point where I would do things differently.
And would you go for a doula again?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for me, it's a no-brainer. You know, it was such a valuable support, both in the lead up during the birth and in the days immediately after birth, because she came to visit us. That absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Did you have any fear before going in to birth your baby?
You know, I didn't have any fear before going into birth, but I did have fear when I first got pregnant. There was that moment in my head of, oh my God, what does this mean? Can I do this? How do I get through it all? And, you know, and my life is going to be completely different. You know, all of that stuff that comes up when there are major life-changing events taking place. So,
and how did you deal with it?
Well, for me, this is where hypnobirthing was great, you know, because as well as the book, we actually also got a CD of a number of hypnotic tracks, and I listened to them. You know, there was a suggested schedule. You listen to these 3 tracks on the Monday and these tracks on the Tuesday. So my practice was basically to put, in fact, you're supposed to do some practice hypnobirthing with your husband, but because of our crazy schedule in our family, we honestly have never done a single one of them. But every night I went to bed with earphones in, listening to the hypnotic track, which had dealt with all of those underlying beliefs and removed the blocks literally as I slept. So I didn't have to do very much for it.
That's great. So all the fears were taken away while you slept.
Magically.
Magic.
How that works.
That's fantastic. And what would you say to a first-time mother-to-be who's watching this, who is still fearful or still stuck with that Hollywood image of what birthing is really like? What can you tell them?
You know, to me, there's a couple of key things, and of them, one is probably about educating yourself. You know, take control of your birthing process and make it the way that you want it to be, because it is such an important milestone in your life, and you want to have a positive, you know, not necessarily perfect experience, but a positive experience, empowering experience of the whole birthing process. It's a time to really cherish, because you get bonded with your, you know, with your partner, with your family. If you already have kids in your family, it's a magical time. So you certainly want to make the most of it. And for me, the way to have that experience is to educate yourself. So reading books like yours, Katrina, and certainly just reading outside, you know, and questioning the dogma that the mainstream system of doctors and nurses might present you with.
So thinking for yourself a little bit.
Absolutely, and just finding what's right for you. You know, in saying that I loved hypnobirthing, it also doesn't mean that it's going to be right for you or the next person. It's about finding what works for you personally. Somebody loves water birth. You know, for me, I read about water birth and I went, yeah, you know what, it's great, but it's not my thing. But then again, I'm a fire sign, so I'm not about water. You know, for somebody else, lotus birth makes perfect sense. For me, you know what, it just wasn't quite my thing. And don't allow anybody to make things right or wrong. I think it's about creating your own personal environment that resonates with your family.
Now, you had a hospital birth, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So can you say that you can have a positive experience within a hospital?
Absolutely, but again, you need to research. You need to research the doctor that, if you are in the private system, you need to research the obstetrician that you're with. What do they specialize in? I specifically wanted to have a female doctor who would understand what a woman is going through. Now, for me, it was relevant. For somebody else, it might not be. I think for me also, bringing doula who advocated on my behalf while she understood the hospital system was very powerful. I felt that I really didn't want to be in the hospital until the latest possible moment. And this is where having her along was such a powerful thing, because I knew that if it was my husband and I would be in that whole, second guessing yourselves, do we have to go now, how close are we now, how close are we now? By having her along, we took that responsibility of us, because she understood the birthing process a lot better and was able to make an educated decision about, okay, now is the time to go.
So she was at your house before you
That's
went
right,
in.
that's right. So we were at home for most of my labour. In fact, we were in the hospital only for the last 3 hours or so before my son was born. And when we arrived there, in fact, they kind of looked at me funny, because I arrived in there smiling. I had to hold on to things from time to time, but I wasn't screaming and carrying on. But I think there is more and more acceptance now within the hospital system that, not everybody comes in screaming like in a Hollywood movie. And, there are a lot of women who are gaining control of their birthing process.
That's fantastic. It sounds like a very empowered experience.
It was. But you know what I also have to say, because sometimes I think hospitals get a really bad rap. People say, oh, they just want to get you onto the production line, and, they're clocking on, they're clocking off, and all of that kind of stuff. And to be honest, in my experience, that was not the case at all. I found the staff in the hospital to be very supportive. There was very much consistency in terms of having the same people. In fact, there was one lady who was due to clock off, and later I found out that she stayed back an extra, 40 minutes or something, because she could see that we were coming into a fairly, crucial point in the whole process. And she said, you know what, instead of handing over the shift, I'll just hang back an extra, however long it takes. But it was clear that the baby was going to be out in the next hour, so she made that decision. So I had a really good experience from that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Okay.